The news broke like a thunderclap. Richard Harrow, the billionaire behind Harrow Biotech, was dead. Known for his innovations in renewable energy and his enigmatic personality, Richard had amassed a fortune worth $2.5 billion. His death wasn't quiet. It came in the form of a devastating explosion aboard his private yacht off the coast of Florida. Authorities initially ruled it an accident, a tragic end to the life of a man who had changed industries and lives. But whispers of foul play quickly surfaced. The timing, the lack of witnesses, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the explosion all pointed to something more sinister. Yet, the mystery of Richard's death wasn't the only secret waiting to be uncovered. As lawyers began sorting through his estate, a shocking revelation emerged. A letter, locked away in his private safe, hinted at the existence of an illegitimate daughter living in Mexico. This revelation set off a chain reaction, threatening to unravel the carefully curated legacy of a man who had spent decades hiding the truth. This is the story of love, betrayal, and a young woman's fight to claim her place in a world she never imagined. 30 years before his death, Richard Harrow was a man on the rise. Harrow Biotech was still in its infancy, and Richard traveled the globe, seeking investors and partnerships to fuel his vision. It was during one of these trips, to a small town in Mexico, that he met Elena Maria. Elena Maria was a young teacher, known in her community for her kindness and her unwavering dedication to her students. She had never met anyone like Richard. His charm, intelligence, and vision for the future captivated her. To Richard, Elena Maria was a breath of fresh air. In a life filled with corporate meetings and endless deals, she represented simplicity and authenticity. Their connection was instant and undeniable. Richard, who had been in Mexico to explore renewable energy projects, extended his stay. The two spent days exploring the town, sharing dreams, and laughing over meals cooked by Elena Maria herself. For the first time in years, Richard allowed himself to be vulnerable. But Richard was a man with responsibilities. His growing company demanded his attention, and his time in Mexico was always meant to be temporary. When the project wrapped up, Richard returned to the United States, promising to stay in touch. Elena Maria believed him. She waited for letters that never came, for phone calls that never arrived. It wasn't until weeks later that she discovered she was pregnant. Alone and uncertain, she decided to raise her child without Richard, determined to give her daughter the best life she could. The years passed, but for Elena Maria, the memory of Richard Harrow lingered. She often wondered if he had ever thought of her, if he even remembered the brief but meaningful connection they had shared. But life had a way of demanding focus on the present, and raising a child alone left little time for what-ifs. Her daughter, Elena Martinez, grew up without ever knowing the truth about her father. To her, the man who had given her life was little more than a shadow, a story her mother seldom told. Elena Maria had always said, "Your father was a kind man, but his world was far away from ours." Elena Martinez was an ambitious and caring soul, much like her mother. She excelled in school, driven by a deep sense of responsibility and a desire to honor the sacrifices her mother had made. Despite their modest life in Mexico, Elena's world was rich in love and hard-earned joy. She pursued a career in teaching, finding fulfillment in helping children who reminded her of herself. Full of dreams but limited by circumstance. Back in the United States, Richard Harrow had become a titan of industry. His name was synonymous with innovation, and his company, Harrow Biotech, was a leader in renewable energy solutions. Yet, despite his success, Richard carried a quiet burden. He had made choices in his younger years that left scars, not just on others, but on himself. Richard's regret over Elena Maria and the daughter he had never met grew as he aged. He had tried, on more than one occasion, to reach out. But his attempts were always thwarted by the complexities of his life. Letters remained unsent, and the thought of disrupting Elena Maria's world kept him from pursuing the connection further. On the rare nights when he allowed himself to reflect, Richard would imagine what his daughter might be like. Did she have her mother's warm smile? Did she share his restless curiosity? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he told himself that time would provide an opportunity to make things right. That opportunity, however, never came. As the details of Richard's death unfolded, so did the secrets he had tried to keep. The letter discovered in his private safe changed everything. It was addressed to his lawyer, Jonathan Blake, and contained clear instructions. If anything were to happen to Richard, Jonathan was to locate Elena Martinez, the daughter Richard had long kept hidden from the world. Jonathan, a seasoned legal professional, was no stranger to managing complex estates. But this was different. The existence of a hidden heir, one who had no knowledge of her connection to the Harrow fortune, was a revelation that could shake the foundation of everything Richard had built. Following the instructions in the letter, Jonathan began his search for Elena. With limited information, he faced an uphill battle. The only clues were the name of a small town in Mexico and the vague description of Elena Maria provided by Richard decades earlier. When Jonathan finally tracked down Elena Martinez, she was in the middle of a lesson, her classroom buzzing with the laughter of children. The scene was a stark contrast to the news he was about to deliver, news that would shatter the quiet life she had built and pull her into a world of unimaginable wealth, power, and danger. When Jonathan Blake entered the modest classroom in the small Mexican village, his presence was like a ripple disrupting calm waters. Elena Martinez, standing before a group of wide-eyed students, looked up at the unfamiliar figure. She wiped chalk dust from her hands, her brows knitting in confusion as Jonathan approached. "Miss Martinez," he began, his tone formal but gentle. "My name is Jonathan Blake. I'm here on behalf of your father, Richard Harrow." The words hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. Elena blinked, her mind struggling to connect the pieces. "I think you have the wrong person," she replied cautiously. Jonathan shook his head. "I wish it were that simple. I have a letter from Mr. Harrow, your father, explaining everything. I know this must be overwhelming, but it's important that we talk." Her students stared, sensing the gravity of the moment. Elena quickly dismissed them, her hands trembling as she guided them out of the room. When the door closed, she turned to Jonathan. "My father?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan handed her a sealed envelope, the name Elena Martinez scrawled in bold, deliberate handwriting. She opened it with hesitant fingers, her eyes scanning the words that Richard had written, words that carried years of regret and longing. "My dearest Elena," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer here. I wish I had been brave enough to face the past and meet you in person, but life has a way of complicating even the simplest desires. You are my daughter, my legacy, and I hope this letter reaches you with the kindness and understanding I failed to offer in life." The letter was both an apology and an explanation. Richard spoke of his love for her mother, his inability to balance his growing empire with his personal life, and his decision, one he now deeply regretted, to stay silent. He acknowledged her resilience, her independence, and expressed pride in the person she had become, even from afar. Elena's hand shook as she lowered the letter. A storm of emotions churned within her. Anger, sadness, confusion, and a strange, aching sense of closure. Jonathan cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Miss Martinez, I understand this is a lot to process. But there's more. Mr. Harrow named you as his sole heir. His estate, valued at $2.5 billion, belongs to you." Her head snapped up, her expression shifting from shock to disbelief. "Billion?" she repeated. "This must be a mistake. I'm just a teacher. I don't even know this man." Jonathan remained calm. "I understand how overwhelming this must be. But the letter, along with the instructions he left with me, makes it clear. You are his daughter, and the rightful heir to his fortune." The weight of the revelation threatened to crush her. A father she never knew, a fortune she never asked for, and a life she couldn't imagine, all of it felt like an illusion, a story that didn't belong to her. But the reality was unavoidable. As Jonathan explained the legalities and what came next, Elena couldn't shake the sense that this was only the beginning. With wealth came power, and with power came those willing to do anything to claim it. She looked at Jonathan, her voice steady despite her turmoil. "What happens now?" Jonathan hesitated before responding. "Now, we return to the United States to settle the estate. But I need you to understand, this inheritance won't come without challenges. There are people who will try to dispute your claim. People who will see your existence as a threat." Elena nodded slowly. "I didn't ask for this. But if this is my father's legacy, I won't let anyone take it from me." Jonathan's respect for her grew in that moment. Despite the chaos and uncertainty, Elena displayed a strength that Richard would have admired. Together, they left the classroom, stepping into a world that would test Elena in ways she never thought possible. The moment Elena Martinez's claim to the Harrow fortune was announced, the wolves began to circle. News of the billionaire's hidden heir spread like wildfire, igniting public fascination and private schemes. In the boardrooms of Harrow Biotech, whispers turned into open hostility. The company's executives, particularly those with vested interests in keeping the wealth within their control, saw Elena as a threat. Margaret Lawson, a senior board member, convened an emergency meeting with the company's legal team. "We cannot let an unknown girl from nowhere walk away with the Harrow fortune," she snapped. Her voice dripped with disdain. "We need to challenge this, find any way to discredit her claim." The first move came swiftly. An anonymous tip was leaked to the press, questioning the legitimacy of Elena's parentage. Tabloids ran sensational headlines, speculating that she was a fraud attempting to exploit Richard Harrow's death. Elena, now in Los Angeles under Jonathan Blake's protection, watched helplessly as her face appeared on every screen and newspaper. "Why are they doing this?" Elena asked Jonathan, her frustration evident. "Because they're afraid," Jonathan replied. "Your existence changes everything. Harrow Biotech's future, the control of Richard's estate, it all hinges on you. And they'll do whatever it takes to undermine you." As the smear campaign escalated, other opportunists joined the fray. Two individuals stepped forward, claiming to be illegitimate children of Richard Harrow. Both produced forged documents, attempting to prove their connection. One man, a former employee of Harrow Biotech, even provided a fabricated birth certificate. Jonathan's team worked tirelessly to dismantle the false claims. The forged documents were exposed, and both imposters were discredited. But the damage to Elena's reputation lingered. Social media buzzed with conspiracy theories, and her every move was scrutinized. Meanwhile, within Harrow Biotech, Margaret and her allies plotted a more insidious strategy. They began lobbying the board to transfer a significant portion of the company's assets into offshore accounts, arguing that the ongoing legal battle threatened the company's stability. It was a preemptive strike. If Elena won her case, they planned to ensure there was little left for her to inherit. Jonathan, anticipating such a move, filed an injunction to freeze the company's assets. The legal battle intensified, with both sides throwing accusations and counterclaims. Through it all, Elena remained determined. "I didn't ask for this," she told Jonathan one evening. "But if this is my father's legacy, I won't let them destroy it." Her resolve was tested further when threats against her became personal. Anonymous messages, laced with veiled warnings, began arriving at her hotel. Jonathan beefed up security, but the tension was palpable. "They're trying to scare you," he said. "Don't let them win." Despite the chaos, a glimmer of hope emerged. An ally within Harrow Biotech, an executive disillusioned with Margaret's tactics, leaked internal documents to Jonathan's team. The files detailed the offshore accounts and proved that Margaret and her allies had been siphoning company funds for years, long before Richard's death. The revelation was a turning point. Armed with the evidence, Jonathan prepared to expose Margaret's corruption, but he knew that the fight wasn't over. "This is just the beginning," he warned Elena. "They won't back down easily. And there's still the question of your father's death." Elena nodded, her determination unwavering. "Then we'll face whatever comes next. I won't let them take this from me." The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back rows, their pens poised to capture every dramatic twist in the case. At the center of it all was Elena Martinez, sitting beside Jonathan Blake, her face calm but her hands tightly clenched under the table. Across from her sat Margaret Lawson and her team of high-powered attorneys, their strategy clear: discredit Elena at all costs. The hearing opened with Margaret's lawyer, Thomas Grant, delivering his argument. "Your Honor, the claim that Miss Martinez is the sole heir to Mr. Harrow's estate is not only unsubstantiated but riddled with inconsistencies. We believe the court must demand irrefutable evidence before entertaining such an extraordinary claim." Jonathan rose, his voice steady. "The DNA test results have already confirmed Elena Martinez as Richard Harrow's biological daughter. The legitimacy of her claim is not in question. What is in question is why the opposition continues to misrepresent the facts." The tension in the room was palpable as Jonathan presented the results again, this time accompanied by Richard's handwritten letter. The judge studied the evidence, nodding slightly. "These documents do carry significant weight," he said. "But I will allow the defense to continue their cross-examination." Margaret's team called witness after witness, including former employees of Harrow Biotech, attempting to paint Elena as a fraud who had fabricated her connection to Richard. Each claim was systematically dismantled by Jonathan. The turning point came when Jonathan introduced the internal documents leaked by the whistleblower, revealing Margaret's embezzlement and offshore accounts. "This," Jonathan declared, holding up the damning files, "is the real reason behind their opposition. Margaret Lawson and her associates have been siphoning funds from Harrow Biotech for years. Their attempt to discredit Elena is nothing more than a smokescreen to cover their crimes." The courtroom erupted in whispers as Margaret's face turned pale. Thomas Grant scrambled to counter the evidence, but the damage was done. The judge ordered an immediate inquiry into the allegations, forcing Margaret and her allies to retreat into silence. Despite the apparent victory, Jonathan knew the fight wasn't over. The court still needed to issue a final ruling on Elena's inheritance, and the specter of Richard's mysterious death loomed over the proceedings. Outside the courtroom, Elena faced a growing media frenzy. Reporters shouted questions, their cameras flashing as she exited with Jonathan. She stopped briefly, her voice firm. "I'm not here to take what isn't mine. I'm here to honor my father's legacy and ensure that the truth prevails. That's all I want." The statement resonated with the public, shifting sentiment in her favor. But behind closed doors, Jonathan remained cautious. "They're on the defensive now, but desperate people make desperate moves," he warned Elena. His words proved prophetic. The next morning, Elena awoke to news that Margaret had filed an emergency motion to delay the court's decision, citing newly discovered evidence. The motion was a stalling tactic, a last-ditch effort to regain control. Jonathan was prepared. He filed a counter-motion, demanding that the court prioritize the resolution of the case to prevent further harm to Harrow Biotech's shareholders and employees. The judge, recognizing the urgency, scheduled a final hearing for the following week. As the days passed, Elena reflected on how far she had come. From a modest life as a teacher to the center of a billion-dollar inheritance battle, she had faced challenges that would have broken many. But she knew the fight wasn't just for her, it was for her mother, her father's memory, and the countless lives that could be changed by what she chose to do with his legacy. The final hearing arrived, and the stakes had never been higher. Elena sat quietly in the courtroom, her hands clasped tightly together, while Jonathan prepared his final arguments. Across the aisle, Margaret Lawson appeared composed, but the cracks in her confidence were beginning to show. The judge called the court to order, and Margaret's attorney, Thomas Grant, made the first move. "Your Honor," he began. "We have new evidence that casts doubt on Miss Martinez's claim to the Harrow estate." Grant presented what he described as a forgotten document, a supposed handwritten letter from Richard Harrow, naming Margaret as the interim trustee of his fortune. It was a desperate gamble, one that Jonathan immediately recognized as a forgery. Jonathan rose, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, the authenticity of this document is highly questionable. Mr. Harrow's handwriting has been extensively analyzed, and this letter does not match his verified signatures. Furthermore, we have evidence that this document was manufactured recently, likely as an attempt to stall these proceedings." The judge studied the letter carefully, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Blake," he said, "do you have evidence to support this claim?" Jonathan nodded and motioned to a handwriting expert who had been sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom. The expert testified, presenting detailed comparisons between the alleged letter and Richard's authentic handwriting samples. The differences were undeniable. Margaret's composure faltered. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the judge dismissed the document as fraudulent. "This is the second instance of fabricated evidence presented by the defense," he said sternly. "Such actions will not be tolerated." Jonathan seized the momentum. He presented the final piece of evidence that would seal Elena's case. Richard's encrypted emails, retrieved from his personal server, which included messages discussing his intentions to recognize Elena as his heir. The emails were a revelation, leaving no doubt about Richard's wishes. "This," Jonathan declared, "is the truth." Richard Harrow knew Elena Martinez was his daughter. He intended for her to inherit his estate and carry on his legacy. Any attempts to dispute this are baseless and motivated by greed. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I have reviewed all the evidence and heard both sides. The weight of the proof presented by Miss Martinez and her counsel is overwhelming. The court recognizes Elena Martinez as the sole heir to Richard Harrow's estate." The ruling sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Margaret and her team sat in stunned silence, their last hope shattered. Reporters outside scrambled to relay the news, their cameras trained on Elena as she exited the courthouse. Elena paused briefly to address the gathered crowd. "This has been a long and challenging journey," she said. "But today, justice prevailed. My father's legacy is not about wealth, it's about what we choose to do with it. I intend to honor him by using this opportunity to make a difference." The victory was bittersweet. Elena had won the right to her inheritance, but the battle had exposed the darker side of power and greed. Jonathan, standing by her side, spoke softly. "You've done something incredible today. But this is just the beginning. What comes next is up to you." With the court ruling in her favor, Elena Martinez should have felt relief. Instead, she was haunted by the unanswered questions surrounding her father's death. The explosion on his yacht had been ruled an accident, but whispers of foul play lingered. Jonathan Blake, always meticulous, shared her suspicions. "I've seen too many cases where accidents weren't accidents," Jonathan said during one of their discussions. "Richard had enemies. People who stood to gain from his death. If we dig deeper, we might find answers." Elena hesitated. She had already endured so much. But the thought of her father's legacy being tainted by unanswered questions was unbearable. "Do it," she said firmly. "Find the truth." Jonathan reached out to Richard's private investigator, Michael Kane, who had worked closely with him in the past. Michael began retracing Richard's final days, poring over financial records, emails, and the yacht's maintenance logs. The deeper he dug, the more inconsistencies he uncovered. One name kept surfacing: Margaret Lawson. Emails showed that Richard had grown increasingly wary of her influence within Harrow Biotech. Just weeks before his death, Richard had confronted Margaret about suspicious financial transactions, evidence of embezzlement that he had planned to bring to the board. Michael also discovered that Margaret had met with Victor Hayes, a known corporate saboteur, just days before the explosion. Victor had a reputation for orchestrating hostile takeovers and using underhanded tactics to eliminate obstacles. The most damning piece of evidence came from the yacht's black box, which had been overlooked during the initial investigation. Michael recovered it from the authorities, and its data revealed an anomaly: a deliberate tampering with the yacht's fuel system. The explosion wasn't an accident; it had been engineered. Jonathan and Michael presented their findings to Elena. The implications were staggering. Margaret had not only stolen from Harrow Biotech but had likely conspired to kill Richard to protect her secrets. Elena's hands trembled as she held the report. "She killed him," she whispered. "All of this, everything he built, it wasn't enough for her." Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll take this to the authorities. Margaret won't escape justice." The case was reopened, and the FBI launched a formal investigation. Margaret, once untouchable, found herself at the center of a criminal inquiry. Her attempts to deny involvement crumbled as evidence piled up. Bank records tied her to payments made to Victor Hayes, and the black box data confirmed their role in Richard's death. As Margaret was arrested, Elena felt a mix of vindication and sorrow. She had fought for her father's legacy, and now she had uncovered the truth about his demise. But the cost was immense. Jonathan, ever the pragmatist, reminded her of what lay ahead. "This doesn't end here. The company needs leadership, and the world will be watching what you do next." Margaret Lawson's arrest marked the end of a dark chapter in the Harrow legacy. Her conviction for embezzlement and conspiracy to commit murder not only brought justice for Richard Harrow but also sent shockwaves through the corporate world. The media followed every development, painting Margaret as the epitome of greed. For Elena Martinez, the victory was bittersweet. She had uncovered the truth and reclaimed her father's legacy, but it came at a cost. The battle had exposed the lengths people would go for power and wealth. Despite her triumph, she felt a deep sense of responsibility to ensure that Richard's life and work were remembered for their true purpose. Elena took her first steps as the new face of Harrow Biotech with purpose and determination. Her first act was to initiate a complete audit of the company, ensuring transparency and rebuilding trust among shareholders and employees. She also established the Richard Harrow Foundation, dedicating a significant portion of the estate to funding renewable energy projects and educational programs. At the foundation's inaugural event, Elena stood before a crowd of investors, scientists, and supporters. Her voice carried a mix of strength and vulnerability as she addressed them. "My father's life was not without mistakes," she said. "But his vision was one of progress and innovation. He believed in creating a better world, and I intend to honor that. This foundation is not just about continuing his work. It's about ensuring that his legacy benefits those who need it most." Her speech was met with applause, but the most profound moment came when she unveiled a scholarship program for underprivileged students pursuing studies in renewable energy. It was a gesture that mirrored Richard's own belief in the power of knowledge to transform lives. As the months passed, Elena found herself reflecting on her journey. She thought of her mother, who had raised her with love and resilience, and of the father she had never met but now felt deeply connected to. Jonathan Blake, who had stood by her side through every twist and turn, joined her one evening at the Harrow Biotech headquarters. "You've come a long way, Elena," he said. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied. "But this isn't just about me. It's about making sure that everything my father built serves a purpose beyond profit." Jonathan nodded. "You've done more than honor his legacy. You've created your own." Elena's story is one of resilience, justice, and the power of truth. It reminds us that wealth and power come with immense responsibility, and that true legacy lies in what we give, not what we take. What would you have done in Elena's place? Could you have faced the challenges, the betrayals, and the weight of inheriting such a legacy? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your perspective. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more compelling narratives to life. Thank you for watching, and we wish you a day filled with inspiration and positivity. Stay hopeful, stay strong, and may luck always be on your side.